Logan Carter thought his bank was running smoothly until he heard a teller sobbing in the break room. As CEO of Redwood National Bank, Logan had built his career from the ground up. Unlike most executives who relied on reports and polished presentations, he preferred a more direct approach, going undercover as a regular customer to see the truth for himself. Tonight, he chose a small branch in Cincinnati, Ohio. On paper, everything looked fine: steady profits, positive customer reviews. But Logan had learned one thing in his years of leadership: numbers don't tell the whole story. Dressed in a navy blue button-down and jeans, he stepped inside the branch, blending in with the after-work crowd. The bank had a familiar late evening stillness, only a handful of customers finishing their transactions before heading home. Yet, something fell off. The tellers moved with mechanical precision, their smiles polite but forced. The air was heavy, an unspoken tension lingering beneath the surface. Logan had visited many branches, but this one had a different energy, subtle but undeniable. Then he heard it, a soft, muffled sob, barely noticeable, coming from the break room at the back. Logan froze, his instincts kicking in. It wasn't the kind of casual frustration that came from a long shift or a difficult customer. This was something deeper, something he wasn't meant to hear. His eyes flickered to the branch manager, a tall man in a stiff gray suit standing near the offices. His posture was rigid, his gaze watchful. He wasn't just supervising, he was controlling. And Logan knew, without a doubt, something was very wrong inside this bank. Logan Carter hadn't inherited wealth. He hadn't been handed a golden opportunity or had a powerful last name to open doors for him. He had earned everything. At 19, he had taken his first job as a part-time teller while studying finance at a state university. The days were long, early morning classes, followed by back-to-back shifts at the bank and late-night study sessions that often ended with him asleep on his textbooks. He had dealt with impatient customers, learned the intricacies of financial transactions, and seen firsthand what it meant to be on the front lines of banking. He worked his way up, from teller to assistant manager, then branch manager, and eventually into the corporate world. He understood what it meant to grind, to struggle, to fight for every promotion. That's why, when he became the CEO of Redwood National Bank, he refused to be the kind of leader who made decisions from an ivory tower. Spreadsheets, reports, and performance reviews told only half the story. The real truth of how a branch operated lived in the exhausted sighs of employees after a long shift, in the subtle hesitations of a teller handling a difficult customer, in the break rooms where workers whispered about things they were too afraid to say out loud. So, every few months, Logan went undercover. No bodyguards, no corporate entourage, no one knew who he was. He walked into branches as a regular customer, blending in with the crowd, taking mental notes, and watching for signs that something wasn't right. He had caught lazy managers, disorganized operations, and poor customer service before. But tonight, something felt different. On paper, this Cincinnati branch was one of the best performers. High profits, solid customer reviews, no internal complaints. But Logan had been in the industry long enough to know that numbers don't always tell the truth. As he stepped inside, he had one goal: to find out what was really happening inside these walls. Logan stepped farther into the bank, his eyes scanning the room like a seasoned observer. Years of experience had trained him to pick up on the unspoken language of a workplace. Body language, micro-expressions, and the hidden tension that numbers never revealed. Something here was off. The atmosphere was too quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that came when people were too afraid to speak freely. His eyes flicked to the branch manager, a man in his mid-40s standing stiffly near the back office. Derek Hudson. Logan had read his file before coming in. An experienced manager, no formal complaints, a clean track record. But a piece of paper couldn't show the way a man carried himself. Derek wasn't just overseeing operations. He was watching, controlling, calculating. His sharp blue eyes scanned the room like a predator, ensuring his prey didn't step out of line. He didn't seem concerned about customers. His focus was solely on the employees. Logan shifted his gaze to the tellers. A young male teller, no older than 24, was helping a middle-aged woman deposit check. His name tag read Tyler. Something about him seemed off. His fingers hovered too long over the keyboard before typing, and his smile looked forced, like someone trying too hard to act normal. Every few seconds, he stole a glance toward Derek Hudson, as if seeking silent approval. Logan had seen this before. Fear. He turned his focus to the customers. No one seemed upset. No long lines. No irate patrons yelling about account fees. If everything appeared normal on the surface, then why did the employees look so tense? Then he heard it. A soft, muffled sob. The sound was faint, barely there, but distinct enough to make Logan stop in his tracks. His head turned instinctively toward the back of the branch, where the employee break room door was slightly ajar. Inside, he spotted a young female teller, Emily Walker, gripping the edge of the table as if trying to keep herself together. Her hands were trembling, her shoulders hunched forward in a defensive posture. Her face was turned away from the door, but Logan could see the subtle shakes in her body. She was crying. A male employee, Jake, according to his name tag, stood beside her, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. His stance wasn't aggressive, but his concern was obvious. He leaned slightly toward her, trying to comfort her without drawing attention. Logan's stomach tightened. This wasn't frustration over a difficult customer. It wasn't the exhaustion of a long shift. This was something deeper, something he wasn't meant to witness. He glanced at Derek Hudson, who was still standing near the back, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room. Had he heard it? Was this why the bank felt different? Logan had spent years building an instinct for trouble, and right now, every fiber of his being told him something was very, very wrong. Logan took his place in line, masking his scrutiny with a casual demeanor. From the outside, he looked like just another customer waiting for his turn, but his mind was working fast, dissecting every detail, every interaction, every sign of unease in the room. The tension in the air wasn't just his imagination. Employees were constantly glancing toward Derek Hudson, their expressions tight, their movements stiff. It was subtle, but once Logan noticed it, he saw the pattern everywhere. A young teller hesitating before answering a customer's question, a loan officer's shoulders tensing as she passed the manager's line of sight, the way conversations abruptly cut off whenever Hudson walked by. This wasn't just a strict workplace. This was a controlled environment, dictated by fear. Logan let his eyes drift back toward the break room, where Emily was still seated, her fingers clutching the table as if holding herself together. Jake knelt beside her, his voice low but urgent. Logan strained to listen, catching snippets of their conversation over the sound of quiet transactions. "Jake, you can't let him do this to you." Emily sniffles, shaking her head. "What choice do I have? He's already made it clear. If I don't do what he says, I'm fired." Logan felt a slow burn of anger settle in his chest. This wasn't about a difficult customer. This wasn't about work stress. This was internal abuse, the kind of situation where power was being used as a weapon, where an employee felt trapped with no way out. Derek Hudson. Logan didn't know exactly what the man had done to Emily, but he didn't need all the details yet. Her words were enough. "If I don't do what he says, I'm fired." That wasn't a misunderstanding. That wasn't exaggeration. That was fear. Logan's fingers curled slightly into a fist, but he kept his composure, schooling his expression into one of indifference. He had dealt with toxic managers before, but this felt worse than anything he had encountered. Then, movement from the back of the bank caught his attention. Derek Hudson was staring in his direction, not directly at him. He had no reason to suspect Logan was anything but an ordinary customer. But at the break room, where Emily and Jake were still talking, his expression darkened, and Logan saw the shift in his posture, the stiffening of his shoulders, the slight tightening of his jaw. He wasn't just watching his employees. He was tracking them, controlling them. And now, he didn't like what he was seeing. Logan's stomach turned. He needed to do something. He needed more information. But before he could take another step forward, a teller's voice pulled him back to reality. "Sir, I can help you over here." Logan turned to the counter, forcing a polite smile. For now, he would play the part of the ordinary customer. But in his mind, the game had already changed. Logan approached the counter with the same calm, easy demeanor he always used when undercover. He slid a deposit slip across the glass and looked up at the teller's name tag. Tyler. Young, maybe mid-20s. Short brown hair, clean-shaven, and, most noticeably, visibly anxious. Logan had interacted with thousands of bank tellers in his lifetime, and this was the first one who looked like he was walking on eggshells. "Hey, how's your day going?" Logan asked, keeping his tone light. Tyler hesitated. It was quick, barely a second of delay, but Logan caught it. "It's good," Tyler said, voice controlled but not convincing. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before finally typing in Logan's account number. Logan leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough so that only Tyler could hear. "Is the manager always this involved in teller transactions?" Tyler's shoulders stiffened. He glanced quickly, too quickly, toward Derek Hudson, who was still standing near the back, eyes scanning the room like a predator. He just likes things done a certain way," Tyler said, rushing to change the subject. "Did you need that deposit in checking or savings?" Logan didn't push. He knew when someone was too scared to talk. "Checking," he answered, still watching Tyler's hands, which were slightly trembling as he typed. Whatever was happening in this bank, it wasn't just about strict leadership or high expectations. It was about fear. Tyler slid the receipt across the counter. "Here you go, sir. Anything else I can help with?" Logan took the receipt, but didn't answer right away. Instead, he dropped his voice just a little more. "Take care of yourself, Tyler." Tyler blinked, as if caught off guard, but nodded quickly. "Yeah, you too." Logan stepped away from the counter, but he wasn't leaving. Instead, he casually walked toward the loan officer's desk, pulling out his phone as if checking messages. From this position, he had a clear view of the break room. Emily was still inside, though she had wiped her face and was sitting up straighter now. Jake was still beside her, speaking quietly. Then Logan saw it. Derek Hudson was walking toward them. His pace was calculated, not hurried, not aggressive, but intentional, like a predator moving in on prey. And the moment Emily saw him, she froze. It was almost imperceptible, the way her spine locked up, the way her fingers curled in a fist on her lap, the way her eyes lowered instantly to the floor. This wasn't bad management. This wasn't just a toxic workplace. This was something far, far worse. Logan took a slow, deliberate breath. He knew when to step away and when to push forward. He couldn't walk away now, not when the signs were this clear. He needed proof, evidence of what was happening inside this branch, something to confirm what his instincts already knew. Derek Hudson was running this place on control and fear. His eyes flicked back toward Jake, the male employee who had been comforting Emily earlier. Jake stood near the side counter now, stacking deposit slips into a neat pile. His movements were tense, mechanical, as if his mind was somewhere else. Logan approached casually, making sure his presence didn't feel calculated or suspicious. He reached for the cup of pens on the counter, but then turned to Jake instead. "Hey," Logan said in an easygoing tone. "Got a pen I could borrow?" Jake hesitated. It was brief, a flicker of uncertainty, a second too long before responding. Then, without meeting Logan's eyes, he quickly grabbed a pen from the counter and handed it over. "Yeah, sure." His voice was neutral, too neutral. Logan took the pen, but didn't move away. Instead, he let his voice drop just slightly. "That girl," he said, keeping his tone casual but controlled. "She seems really upset. Is she okay?" Jake froze. It was barely noticeable, but Logan caught it. The way his fingers stopped moving, the way his shoulders tightened, the way his eyes flickered, just for a second, toward the back of the bank where Derek Hudson stood. Jake turned back to his task. "She'll be fine." A standard answer. A lie. Logan tapped the pen lightly against his palm, watching Jake's reaction carefully. "Doesn't look like it," Logan said. Jake exhaled through his nose. He didn't look at Logan, but his hands clenched around the stack of papers. For a moment, Logan thought he wouldn't say anything else, that he would just shrug and move on. But then, finally, Jake spoke, his voice low, barely above a whisper. "She doesn't have a choice." Logan's pulse slowed. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. Jake swallowed hard. He knew he was crossing a line. He kept his hands moving, adjusting the papers on the counter, as if the simple act could shield him from the conversation. "She can't afford to leave," he muttered. "And he knows it." Logan's jaw tightened. He had seen this pattern before. Toxic bosses had a method. They didn't just intimidate employees. They didn't just make work miserable. They targeted the ones who had no way out. If an employee needed their paycheck to survive, they could be manipulated. If they had family obligations, debts, no safety net, they were easy to control. Derek Hudson had found his victim, and Emily Walker was trapped. Logan leaned slightly against the counter, making sure his body language was relaxed, non-threatening. He had to keep Jake talking. "How long has she been here?" Jake hesitated. Then, reluctantly, he answered, "A little over a year." A year. Long enough to feel stuck. Long enough for Derek Hudson to figure out how much leverage he had over her. "And she never thought about leaving?" Logan asked. Jake gave a humorless chuckle. "Of course she did." Logan studied him, waiting. Jake finally glanced at him, just briefly, before looking away again. "But where would she go?" he muttered. "She's got bills. Rent. She can't just walk away." Logan knew the type of situation Jake was describing. Emily wasn't staying at this job because she wanted to. She was staying because Derek Hudson had made sure she felt like she had no choice. And that meant he had power over her. Power that Logan was now determined to take away. Logan kept his expression neutral, but his mind was moving fast. He needed to know exactly how far this had gone. If Emily was being pressured, was she also being threatened? If she was staying because of financial dependency, was Derek exploiting that in ways beyond intimidation? Before he could press further, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Logan saw Jake stiffen. He didn't need to turn around to know why. Derek Hudson was walking toward them. The bank manager's steps were slow, calculated, exuding the same quiet intimidation that Logan had seen in manipulative bosses before. Jake immediately dropped his gaze to the counter, pretending to be busy. The shift in his demeanor was instant. From someone cautiously opening up to someone who had just remembered he wasn't allowed to speak freely. Derek stopped near them, his presence looming over the conversation like a dark cloud. "Everything okay over here?" His voice was smooth, but his eyes were sharp. Jake was the first to answer, his tone quick, rehearsed. "Yeah, just helping a customer." Logan turned to face Derek fully, studying him up close for the first time. Mid-40s, crisp suit, sharp features, cold eyes. The kind of man who had learned to wield power in the worst way possible. The name tag on his blazer read Derek Hudson. And for the first time that night, Logan felt something deeper than frustration. He felt anger. Derek wasn't just a bad boss. He was a man who knew exactly how much control he had over his employees, and he enjoyed it. Derek didn't look at Jake. He looked directly at Logan, sizing him up, judging him. Logan could tell Derek didn't recognize him. Good. It meant he still had the element of surprise. Logan offered a casual smile. "Just getting a pen. Jake was kind enough to help me out." Derek didn't blink. Then, without breaking eye contact, he clapped Jake on the shoulder. The gesture looked friendly to an outsider, but Logan knew exactly what it was. A warning. A reminder. Jake nodded a little too quickly. "Yes, sir." Derek finally broke his gaze from Logan and turned to Jake. "Let's stay focused on work." It wasn't a request. It was a command. Jake immediately lowered his head, going back to stacking the deposit slips. Derek lingered for another second, as if making sure the message had been received, then turned and walked away. Logan kept his posture relaxed, watching him go, watching the way employees shrank under his gaze, watching how he owned his space, how no one even breathed too loudly when he was near. Jake exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. He didn't look at Logan again. The conversation was over. For now, Logan had seen everything he needed to see. This wasn't just a bad manager. This wasn't just a tough work environment. This was a predator with unchecked power. And now, Logan had one goal. Take Derek Hudson down. Logan knew when a conversation was over, or at least when someone was too afraid to continue it. Jake had shut down completely the moment Derek Hudson approached. His body language had changed in an instant, from a man who was reluctantly sharing the truth to a man who had just remembered the consequences of speaking out. And Derek had made sure of that. The branch manager stood tall, his presence looming over the two of them, but his smile was calculated, polished, fake politeness masking something much darker beneath the surface. "Can I help you, sir?" Derek asked smoothly. Logan looked him directly in the eye. He didn't blink, just making conversation. His tone was even, casual, as if he wasn't standing in front of a man who clearly thrived on control. Derek's gaze didn't waver, but there was something in the way his jaw tightened just slightly, in the way his fingers twitched at his side. He was calculating, assessing, trying to figure out whether Logan was just another customer or something more. Then, In a gesture that seemed innocent but was anything but, Derek placed a firm hand on Jake's shoulder. "Let's stay focused on work." Jake barely nodded. "Yes, sir." Logan didn't miss the way Jake kept his head down, the way his shoulders hunched slightly, as if trying to make himself smaller. It was instinctive, conditioned behavior, the reaction of someone who had learned the hard way that defiance wasn't an option. Derek Hudson ruled this place with fear, and now Logan had seen it firsthand. Logan exhaled slowly and stepped away. He wasn't done here, not by a long shot, but he needed a moment to process. He needed a plan. Stepping outside, Logan leaned against the side of the building, pulling out his phone. Not to check messages, not to call anyone, just to think. The warm Cincinnati air did little to cool the slow burn of frustration building in his chest. Everything he had seen so far pointed to a toxic work environment, but something about this situation felt even worse than that. Emily wasn't just miserable at work. She was afraid, and fear like that didn't come from a difficult job or a rude manager. Fear like that came from something deeper, something personal. Logan was lost in thought when, as if fate had intervened, the side door to the bank opened. A figure stepped out, letting out a slow breath, stretching his arms. Tyler. Logan watched as the young teller pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages. He looked exhausted. Perfect timing. Logan tucked his phone back into his pocket and casually walked over. "Long day?" he asked, keeping his tone light. Tyler looked up, startled for a second, but then nodded. "Yeah, Fridays are always busy." Logan leaned slightly against the wall, mirroring Tyler's relaxed posture. "Bet it's even harder when you've got a manager like Hudson." Tyler's reaction was immediate. His fingers tightened around his phone, his shoulders tensed. Not dramatically, but just enough for Logan to catch the hesitation. "He's strict," Tyler said carefully. "Likes things done a certain way." Logan nodded slowly. "That normal for managers?" Tyler hesitated again. He was debating, deciding whether to trust Logan or shut down completely, just like Jake had. Then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, he finally spoke. "He makes Emily stay late, alone." Logan's stomach turned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. A single sentence, 7 words that changed everything. "She makes Emily stay late, alone." It was the missing piece. The reason Emily had looked so shattered in the break room. The reason Jake had said she couldn't afford to leave. The reason Tyler hesitated before answering even the most basic questions about his boss. Logan had been right from the beginning. This wasn't just a toxic workplace. This wasn't just about a bad manager. This was a predatory one. Logan's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. He had to keep Tyler talking. "She ever say anything about it?" Tyler shook his head quickly. "No, but she doesn't have to. We all see it." Logan exhaled slowly. They all knew. Every employee in that branch had seen it happening, but no one said anything. Not because they didn't care, because they were afraid. Because Derek Hudson held their jobs in his hands. Emily was afraid to say no, and now Logan understood exactly why. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Tyler looked away, clearly regretting saying anything at all. Logan nodded once, letting the silence settle. Then, he patted Tyler's shoulder. "Thanks for telling me." Tyler gave a tight, uncertain nod before mumbling something about needing to head back inside. Logan didn't stop him. He just watched as the young teller disappeared through the side door. Then, he turned toward the street, hands in his pockets, heart hammering with quiet anger. This wasn't just another routine, undercover visit anymore. This was something more, something personal, something he wasn't about to walk away from. Derek Hudson thought he was untouchable. He thought no one would dare to challenge him. He thought he could keep using his power unchecked. But he was wrong, because now, Logan Carter knew the truth. And he was about to end it. Logan Carter had seen enough. For years, he had built Redwood National Bank on integrity, respect, and leadership, ensuring that no employee ever felt trapped, mistreated, or powerless. And yet, right under his own company's roof, Derek Hudson had created a culture of fear. That ended tonight. He stepped back inside the bank. His movements were measured, deliberate, not rushed, not hesitant. He wasn't walking in as a customer anymore. He was walking in as a CEO on a mission to end Derek Hudson's reign. Logan moved straight to the teller stations, locking eyes with Emily Walker. She had just finished assisting a customer, and though she tried to mask her exhaustion, he could see the weight she was carrying. The way her shoulders sagged slightly, the way her fingers gripped the counter, the way her eyes flickered toward the manager's office, as if constantly aware of his presence. She was still afraid, and Logan was about to change that. "Excuse me, Emily," Logan said, his voice calm but firm. "I need to speak with you for a moment." Emily froze. Her gaze darted to the side, toward Derek Hudson, who had just stepped out his office. His expression darkened instantly. Logan expected him to intervene, and he did. "She's working," Derek said smoothly, walking toward them at a slow, controlled pace. "If you need assistance, another teller can help you." His tone was polite. Too polite. A man masking his authority under professionalism. Logan turned toward him, keeping his face completely neutral. Then, he dropped the bombshell. "Actually," Logan said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "I think we should have this conversation right now." Derek blinked. He hesitated, just for a second too long. Logan reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, flipping it open to reveal his executive ID badge. The word CEO, Redwood National Bank, gleamed under the fluorescent lights. A sharp gasp filled the air. A customer near the counter stopped mid-signature, staring in shock. A lone officer in the back whispered something to a colleague, her eyes wide. But the most satisfying reaction? Derek Hudson turned pale. For the first time that evening, Derek Hudson didn't have a response ready. His mouth opened slightly, then shut again. His hands tensed at his sides. Logan took a step closer, lowering his voice so only Derek could hear. "You thought you could get away with this?" Logan said, his words measured, dripping with quiet authority. "Not anymore." Derek inhaled sharply, his mask of confidence slipping. "Sir, Logan didn't let him finish. He pulled out his phone and dialed corporate HR, right there, in front of everyone. The moment the call connected, Logan didn't waste a second. "This is Logan Carter," he said, his voice loud and clear so everyone in the branch could hear. "I'm at the Cincinnati branch. We have a serious misconduct issue. I need Derek Hudson terminated, immediately." A heavy silence filled the room. Derek stiffened, his face turning a shade of ashen gray. "Sir, wait," Derek began, but Logan cut him off with a single look. The kind of look that ended careers. The kind of look that said, "You're done." On the other end of the line, HR didn't even hesitate. "Understood, Mr. Carter. Do you require security at the branch?" "No," Logan said smoothly, his eyes still on Derek. "I'll handle it." Derek swallowed hard. For the first time, he wasn't the one in control. Logan lowered the phone, but didn't break eye contact. "Go to your office. Pack your things." His voice was calm, deadly calm. Derek stood frozen. His fingers twitched, as if his body was trying to cling to power that no longer existed. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward his office. Logan watched him go. He didn't look back at his employees. He didn't say a word to Emily, because he knew he had lost. The tension in the branch shifted instantly. Emily let out a breath she had probably been holding for months. Jake and Tyler exchanged wide-eyed glances, like they couldn't believe what had just happened. The other employees stood still, processing the moment. And then, one by one, they started moving again, but this time with a weight lifted off their shoulders. For the first time since he had entered the branch, Logan saw something that hadn't been there before. Relief. Emily met his gaze, her hand still trembling slightly. "He's really gone?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Logan nodded. "He's gone." A small, disbelieving laugh escaped her lips. She covered her mouth, her eyes glossing over. Jake placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, and for the first time all night, she didn't flinch. Logan turned to the rest of the employees. "From now on, this branch is under direct review. We're going to make changes, not just replacing him, but ensuring that no one else like him ever gets this kind of power again." Jake spoke up, his voice strong for the first time. This isn't just about him." Logan nodded, encouraging him. "Go on." Jake hesitated, then squared his shoulders. "The way things work here, it's not just one bad manager. The pressure, the fear of speaking up, it's built into the system." Tyler nodded in agreement. "A lot of us feel like if we say anything, we'll be out of job." Logan absorbed their words, his resolve strengthening. "That ends now." He turned to Emily, who was still processing everything. "What happens next?" Logan asked, giving her a small smile. That's up to you. She blinked, caught off guard. Me? You tell me what this branch needs, Logan said. You all do. For the first time in over a year, Emily Walker felt something unfamiliar. Control. She looked around at her colleagues. At Jake, at Tyler, at the faces that had once worn the same fear she had felt every day. And then she straightened her back, lifted her chin, and spoke. We need to make sure this never happens again. Logan nodded. Then that's exactly what we'll do. Tonight, Derek Hudson had lost his power. And for the first time in a long time, the employees of Redwood National Bank had found theirs. Derek Hudson was gone, escorted out of the bank with nothing but a cardboard box of his belongings and the crushing weight of his downfall on his shoulders. He had ruled this branch with fear, believing that no one would dare challenge him, that the employees he controlled were too afraid, too powerless to speak up. But in the end, he had been wrong. Now, the air in the bank felt different, lighter, freer. The kind of change that happens when a weight that's been crushing people for far too long is finally lifted. Logan turned to face the employees. Their expressions ranged from shock to relief, but there was one common thread among all of them. For the first time, they weren't watching over their shoulders. They weren't waiting for something bad to happen. They weren't afraid. Logan took a breath, meeting their eyes one by one. This isn't just about getting rid of one bad manager. His voice was strong, steady. It's about making sure this never happens again. Emily let out a shaky exhale. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear anymore, but from the overwhelming realization that she was finally free. She didn't have to stay late anymore. She didn't have to dread walking into work every day. She didn't have to live in fear. Jake stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Tyler nodded in quiet agreement. They weren't just co-workers anymore. They were a team, stronger than ever. Logan's gaze swept across the room. These people had been silenced for too long. That ended today. From now on, no one will be afraid to speak up again. There was a moment of silence. Then, slowly, the employees started to nod. Some smiled, small, hesitant, like they were still adjusting to the idea of safety. Emily wiped at her eyes, but this time, it wasn't because she was hiding tears. It was because, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't crying out of fear. Logan turned toward the door, ready to leave them to their new beginning. But before he did, he left them with one final thought. A message for anyone who had ever felt powerless. If you ever feel trapped under someone's abusive power, speak up. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person to break the cycle. And tonight, that cycle had been broken. Have you ever experienced a toxic workplace? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters. Let's stand together against workplace abuse.